stuck with me is there's the new tech supercharging AI and LLMs. There's the entrepreneurship lens, which would love to get with Faith in a second. However, there are some risks associated with this, such as both the environmental aspects, as well as potentially bias driven by the abundance of data coming from a specific part of the globe. If that makes sense. Specifically, kind of jumping onto the entrepreneurship side, I would love to get your thoughts on impact of AI, both opportunities and kind of risks in emerging countries.
Yeah, absolutely, and can't agree more with what other panelists have said here. And just want to start from a place of gratitude. Thank you for welcoming us here again. And for the lens, just to elaborate on the lens that I look at this through, this is from being in the Valley through the first kind of technological revolution and being on the front lines at Google, seeing that through, and then now being on the investor side, as Turgut mentioned, in some of those startups that are really harnessing this. The first thing I wanted to start with is that AI and quantum computing, you do not be intimidated by these things. They sound very complex and very ephemeral. They don't need to be, and that's the first thing I want everyone to walk away with, that this is something we can all use and bring into our own lives from either a personal or business perspective, and see the opportunity in it. And the reason I start with this is because I think there is a lot of coverage and a lot of media at times, and certainly there are risks and opportunities, as Turgut said. I just always try to center on the opportunity that exists. So please know that's the lens I look at this through. And if I'm looking at the continuum of an emerging to a developed market, what you saw through the first technological revolution was a lot of global winners. And a lot of those global winners, yes, tended to come from Silicon Valley. That paradigm is shifting. That is changing. Some of those global winners are now coming from Europe. Some are now coming from Asia. The reality of the infrastructure that's been built and the ability that has now created platforms, just as Vishal said, that has allowed other businesses to be built on top of them, whether that's smartphones or social media or search engines or whatever it may be. AI is another one of those. So it does not mean that you actually have to have the technology or build the companies that are actually building the models or building the infrastructure, but it is about how you leverage and adapt and reach the potential that those allow you to build upon. So whereas those global winners, and I think OpenAI is a great example of just like an infrastructure that now everyone can use. So yes, while quote unquote that global winner may exist in the Valley, and it's not a preordained conclusion that they become the winner, but what can be built on top of them is the same thing of what could be built on top of a smartphone as an app, what could be built just as a company using a smartphone, or a company using social media, or a search engine. And that, I think, is the first just like mind shift of understanding, okay, hey, how do we leverage and harness AI? Now, to answer a little bit of the question in terms of, okay, hey, how do we harness that? I think there are three important things. One, you look at this from a policy perspective, from a general public perspective, and from a commercial lens. Why I start with policy is because this is a very important place where I think you will see governments that either embrace or not the power of AI. And I think the fact you're even having a panel on this and engaging in a dialogue is such a positive signal to send from the start. There are many others that are not doing this. So I always try to say, like, those that lean in and go and embrace early are often the ones that win later as well. So from a policy perspective, there are things, even here, and yes, hey, by proximity, a little closer to the UK, seeing that, all right, there are things that are happening like building, there's a lot of academic and research-based talent, and now, yes, deploying whether it's capital, so a £100 million grant to an AI kind of task force associated with, yes, generating policy around AI and really incubating AI within the country, a very positive thing. There is a policy piece around what you've also even seen more recently, a mandate to move even pension funds into venture investment and earmarking at least 5% of their investment into new business development and venture, a very positive signal. I think another signal that is seen that bridges the public gap is the fact that there may be some certainly concerns around job loss. And yes, that transitioning to job creation. If you look back, some of the lessons history has taught us, I often use the assembly line may have been a big scary thing at a certain point in time in the Industrial Revolution when, oh, where's my job going to go building the car, when now there's this much more efficient assembly line, or even robotics, if you will. Well, what actually happened was productivity only gained, and it actually created more jobs as a result, and there was greater efficiency. But what had to happen? People had to retrain, upskill as a result in order to leverage that new technology or way of working. That is a very real thing, and one of the things that's happening here in the UK is even evaluating the fact that right now we are behind on STEM degrees, STEM learnings, and currently mathematics is only mandated through age 16, and that's actually lagging many other developed countries. So now looking at extending that even just to age 18. That's not an overly remarkable or I think like high bar, but thinking of just bridging the gap between policy and public and upskilling or retraining, that is one of those ways whereby, okay, we're going to take this seriously as a government or as a country and say, we need to adapt. We need to do things differently. Every country has that opportunity to look at that on their own. From a public perspective, and I mentioned there's some what I would just call fear-mongering that is out there. There's some reality, don't get me wrong, to some of this as well. You'll hear Elon talk about this at times. It's important that there's prudence and that there is oversight and governance here. But I similarly think that, yes, leaning in from a public perspective in seeing the opportunity and embracing rather than rejecting is a very important thing, and an important thing that, frankly, policy and government plays as well. It will be, and the things we saw at Google were those partners of ours that embraced change and embraced new technology the quickest were the ones that ended up winning in the long run. And that literally, and I'll even use trite examples of like our advertisers that were, the fuel of our business, the ones that were always raising their hand to get into the latest beta and the latest feature and experiment with the latest tech that we were rolling out. Those were the ones that took advantage and spotted the inefficiencies, spotted the opportunities, and then ended up being the big winners in the long run. So again, like, I just take this attitude of like leaning in from policy and then a public perspective. And then lastly, as I referenced, just a third lens from a commercial perspective or business enterprise. This is a place where there are certainly some areas, and maybe it's agriculture and some areas where AI may not have as much influence as others, but almost all areas it will touch in one way or another. And you already see projections from World Bank and other economists, expecting 3%, up to 7% GDP growth as a result of generative AI. You think of like Gen AI, it's basically taking all of the world's knowledge that is digitally available and using it to train models to use for whatever purpose, commercially, publicly, etc. So think of how that can help you if it's writing a speech, writing an email, even in your day-to-day, much less analyzing a market, identifying an opportunity, building a model of your own. I look at this similarly, particularly that STEM lens of, okay, if you can use this not to eliminate jobs, to actually create more, if we are at a gap and you can make engineers 50% more productive. Well, yeah, by writing code, or at least helping them write code, then you've just doubled the capacity of your engineering workforce, or your capabilities overnight, right? So that's OpenAI that may provide the platform, but now it's about how you use it. And that's the upside that at least I see, and then, yes, what we're investing in as a result. So take that a little more tangibly to a legal startup that we've invested in that's using generative AI to evaluate. Their first use case is just NDAs and redlining NDAs. A lot of time is spent looking at NDAs, right? Well, if you can save lawyers' time and get 50%, maybe even 75% efficiency there, then you've just cut the costs that may have once been in play and increase the capacity of that team twofold, threefold, fourfold overnight. So like, this is what I'm saying of like, look at the opportunity, not the risk as much, while of course being present and ensuring that we do put the right policies and regulation around this too. Again, just look at this through to take advantage of a policy, a public, and a commercial lens to really harness this opportunity ahead of us. But this is that seminal moment that the web was not too long ago. We now have it in front of us as we speak.
Firstly, as a consultant, I really appreciate that.
Sure. I'm a former recovering consultant myself, so do what I can for you. I can give you a PowerPoint afterwards too, if you prefer.
One point, all of those messages resonate. One thing that's really stuck with me that I enjoyed is you mentioned this as the iPhone moment.
Right.
Like within everyone's discussions, the discussions we had, this was something indirectly we also said, just out of curiosity, looking, because you mentioned you had the third fund raised, fourth fund being raised, and this is an area you're looking more and more into.
Yeah.
Have you seen, or how are you seeing the paradigm shift, as you said, of winners coming from Silicon Valley versus winners, or at least potential winners of the future coming from developing nations?
Yes. Okay, this is a beautiful thing. This is why I live here, because I want to see, yes, more of these winners coming from Europe, and that's already happening, right? And what Vishal said is so true, just with, hey, that iPhone moment, these platforms, right? For us, a real world example for us, Hoxton, before I arrived, was the first check written into Deliveroo. And before Deliveroo, there were other food delivery companies, and there were pagers, right? And we found that it doesn't work that well, and it's not that efficient to send like text messages over pagers to food delivery, and all right, that did not work. There was a company called Cosmos that failed as a result. It was the iPhone moment, and not just iPhone, it was cheap Android phones with GPS capability that then allowed a company like Deliveroo to then have the ability to track, map, and manage logistics to increase the efficiency of those delivery agents, users, all in one ecosystem, to build off of that platform that was developed. That's what I mean at, all right, now we have the platforms and the infrastructure, OpenAI being another one. You don't have to build OpenAI. Let others do that have. Now, you can build on top of it. You can build that legal startup, as I mentioned, or you can just use that legal startup. That's embracing AI. We've invested in another business intelligence dashboarding tool that's also using OpenAI and ChatGPT. And there's just a proliferation of ideas coming about. There's insurance startups that are looking at it to help improve the processing of their claims and their agents to make them more efficient. You can start to think, wow, there's so many applications and just like real world examples where this applies. Again, you don't have to build the technology to leverage and harness the technology. That's what I'm getting at. And it is just that mind shift of, all right, flipping from, wow, the big scary, this is going to dominate the world, to, all right, how do we take advantage and how do we make sure the winners come from here as a result? Because I, too, personally don't like seeing every other winner coming out of the valley and driving up housing costs and queues at the grocery store and everything else. And now what we're seeing is, like, there are global winners come, if you even look back, of, yeah, hey, Spotify and Skype and others that have won, King.com, others that have won out of Europe. Now with the infrastructure and cloud computing being a big part of it, that's brought down the expense quite significantly, and quantum even further ahead. This starts to level the playing field. And then there's this premise of just like success begets success, and these winners that have come will spawn more as those employees go start their own companies thereafter. We want to see more come from Europe. We think there can be, and this is part of the way we'll do it together, hopefully.
It's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And when we think of everything so far, just to recap the discussion we've had, is with Peyton, we spoke about essentially pioneers or new firms coming out, new winners coming out. Of course, this has to be supported by quantum or tech infrastructure, quantum ideally supercharging this. But it's, use cases only as good as the data being used is, again, what we discussed. Now, this is all great when we look at it from an overall perspective. However, there is one reality that never changes, and it's you require funding to do all of these. So, again, I'm just coming back based on all the discussions we had, both looking at the main question, which is just, again, for developing nations, the opportunities and threats AI has, but also with the lens of financial institutions, FIs. How would you comment, or what's your perspectives on what we've spoken on so far?
So I think, first of all, there will be job losses. That's a reality, right? Because AI can do things that perhaps you don't need mundane people to do that. And one example is, I think 2 weeks ago, an e-commerce company in India, there's a downturn going on. There's not VC funding available easily. E-commerce company 2 weeks ago fired 90% customer care staff by replacing OpenAI. And by doing that, they reduced costs 85%. So effectively, 90% customer care jobs gone, right? But their business hasn't changed. They still can get the same kind of support to their customers by adopting OpenAI. So I think that reality will start coming in. And to your point on the legal function, do you need a team of lawyers to look through your contract and see it mitigate all your risk? No, that perhaps the AI can do it in a few minutes and few seconds. So why we need to have expensive lawyers? Same goes for the accountants or financial services people, right? So I think those are all negative connotation, and I think it will have effect on all our lives in the coming years and the generation. But what also true, when you have these kind of disruptive technology that come and shape how we live the coming generation, it also creates a lot of opportunities. And from the developing countries' point of view, when resources are very limited, the capital is very limited, and aspirations are very high. There's a young people want to, just want to achieve so much. How do you match those realities? So I think the one thing is, I think that's where perhaps the government and the bodies has to come in and create some framework. For example, if you happen to cater to a 100 million population in a country where hospitals are perhaps 100 miles away or 50 miles away, using those resources, using OpenAI and prioritizing what kind of resources needed where, so that you don't need to create the same size of hospital everywhere with the same specialization, but you target what is needed where, and that's where the OpenAI perhaps can really revolutionize delivery of healthcare in the developing countries. Same goes for the education side, right? Humans are got herd mentality. Oh, he's doing MBA, I will also do MBA. My friend is going to do computer science, I will also do the computer science, right? Without less realization whether there's plenty of opportunities or not, right? We just hit the wall when we come out of graduate and see there's no jobs. What to do, right? We're still relying on the parents for funding and all that stuff, especially in the developing countries. So I think that's another thing where OpenAI can really help, match the demand of the sectors where, for example, there may be a particular area in a country where the manufacturing is prominent, and it needs a skill set with a certain know-how. Let's say welders or mechanics or something, and the education institute in that area target those kind of skills because that's the need of that area. Without dislocating this population, that someone is looking for a job going to the bigger city like Istanbul or Ankara because they couldn't find something in a rural area. I think that could be another very good example of creating opportunity using AI, right? The third example come down to agriculture, which is a very good topic Fabio raised, because in developing countries the yield or productivity yield on agricultural land is very limited because of lack of resources, lack of know-how, lack of machinery. I think that's where even AI can help. Just, the moisture of the soil using the drone technology in combination with the drone technology, moisture of the soil, the pesticide, rather than spreading pesticide across the acres of land, you may just target where you see the potential of the origination of the problem and perhaps reduce the cost and increase the productivity. So that's all the core sector, but it relies on fundamental support from the government. What kind of approach do they want to take to deliver the really good services to their population, right? We can talk about a very good tech, but then if you cannot use it to bring benefit to the population, it's useless, right? Because, and I think that's one of the examples. We see the Silicon Valley take a lead on coming out with the technology, and they push this technology on the companies and people, and some of the companies in a country, very irrelevant, may just think we can mirror that, and they fail in the process, right? So that is very much kind of adopting the benefits of AI by looking at what problem we can solve using it and minimize the impact on the jobs creation it will have over the time, because all your customer care jobs, who will need a call center if you have open AI, right? And a country like I grew up in India. I think India started transforming when it became a back office center for a lot of big companies. So do you really need a call center in India of 50,000 people? No, I think one few chat box will be more than enough to give better advice without accent, right? So there's a lot of benefits of that, but also the issue comes of the capital, right? How do you prioritize the limited financial resources to deliver all the benefits? And I think that's where I see the potential of partnering with the private sector, like the banks and institutions, and creating those kind of resources. Maybe, for example, agriculture, I give you the example. If you target agriculture sector and the financial institution work with the government on the framework, where they can see they can definitely have a better productivity and the cost will be offset by increasing the productivity. I think that's where financial sector can help. And not only that, it can link with the sustainability, right? The example I was giving, rather than spreading pesticide on acre of land, target where you will have the potential of the issues, and then perhaps you can not use that much pesticide as well. The cost can also come down on producing goods. And I think I will, in my sector, if someone asks me whether your job will survive tomorrow, I will say I'm not sure. With the ChatGPT, maybe the good model can replace me as well. But I think that's a fun side of thing, because if something goes out, there's something new will come up. Because and I think that's where, like, to your point, you guys' point, harnessing the power of it and creating an ecosystem that enable people to see how they can use it. And also, I think the caution word I will say, especially for the developing countries, because sometimes they think they can just replicate what the developed nation have, which is a very wrong notion, because you still have a population which may not know how to use iPhone, right? They may not know how to speak in English to a chatbot with a specific data sitting behind it, right? So we also need to factor that population, which may be in an age bracket perhaps. They're not very comfortable with it. They still need to talk to someone. They still need to have the similar kind of services that the younger people can enjoy, right? So that's another area, I think, where the government can really help to create the policy and framework. When this new innovation come up, it's not exclusive, it's just inclusive of the wider population in society.
So again, it's just echoing some of the conversations we had. A few key messages is, one, it's coming back to, again, education, or having the baseline as we thought about, and that could come from policy, primarily comes from policy, to be exact. Another very interesting point is, and I'm curious in your experiences, if you, in the recent years in FI, you've seen more interest on this, is leveraging or harnessing the power of AI. Of course, some jobs may be replaced, but it's usually increasing the efficiency or reducing the costs
of one job. Or as Peyton just said, even if you don't create the law firm, using that legal AI chatbot or legal AI advisor, you can decrease your costs. So I am curious from a, again, financial institution perspective, has this or does this increase the appeal of emerging or developing nations? Because how I'm seeing is there seems to be more upside, because if you compare a developed nation who has an established agricultural infrastructure versus a kind of developing nation that is really inefficient, do you think there's enough upside to offset the potential risk of capital for that
I
nation?
think I may be running ahead of my time if I just can articulate how many positive, negative it has, right? Because a lot it still need to be discovered. And what we have seen so far, AI has been there for the last few years. It's not something new. I think the first time we saw, it came to the public domain where people can see what it is doing for them. For example, writing a speech. Even I before coming here, I even asked the question, what is the impact on economic developing countries on the chat GPT, and just to get the view, how it aligned with my own views. It was quite close, by the way. So the point is, these things exist, and I think it will depend from this point onwards how we take it forward, right? And how we want to use it. It's the same thing. X-ray was initially designed for the defense purpose, right? But X-ray became the core piece of our medical delivery services. It's come down to how we adopt these things. But also, I think we also need to factor in, especially because these models work on a vast amount of data. And if he happens to have a bias in the model, your output will be wrong. Imagine you, for example, and I'm sorry, I don't want to take any country name, you go to a very authoritarian country, let's say, for example, Russia, we can call Russia now, right? and if you ask to ChatGPT any article about Putin, right, you will always have positive things, right? And if you, based on that information, if you design certain products and processes, they will never be right, because the data happens to just squid in certain way. So that was the example I wanted to give. And also, I think to leverage the benefit of technology, all these technology exist for a very long time. It's not something new. You have to have a really robust governance around them. And very strong framework. How do you want to benefit either increase productivity? In core principle, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to allow everyone, for example, Meta may do things that perhaps we may not like it, or Google may do things that perhaps we won't like it? Because in the US, on the name of experimentation, we allow those things to happen. But are we happy with that approach? Perhaps yes. So let's have the framework which allow innovation and entrepreneurship, but on the other hand, have a connotation whether are there any long-term consequences for the wider population? Because our baseline is not the same. For the developing countries, they are here, and the developed countries are already here, right? So we cannot really mirror what they are producing today. So that gap has to be gradually narrowed down.
It's also very important. It's leveraging the experience served at best, but mirroring is not the approach.
Mirror is not a good approach.
We're close to coming to the end of our time. We do have a reception 5 where we can have one-on-one discussions, but seeing as it's very hard to have such a strong panel, if there's maybe one critical question anyone has, we can discuss this as a group. If not, again, we have the reception 5. I know Ulash is looking at me.
Should I?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions actually. One is to Lasha. I've been in software development for 20 years. I've seen many eras like Poema or even Flash is that now. So we witnessed many eras, and as developers, even though and experienced developers as well, how do you think we can prepare ourselves about quantum era? Because there is currently it's very enclosed thing. Just big companies have it. When do you think? When do you usually will have the access to these tools, and when do you think it will be even accessible to us? And my second question is to you regarding the commercial side. As well as being a developer, I also have my own company, and I need to take in consideration the commercial side as well for everything. What I'm concerned now is everything goes quite fast, but the legal side is not caught up. And do you think there is any risk on building something and seeing that all the models we trained on is just copyrighted and you can't use it? So how do you what do you think about the legal size and the potential setbacks on that?
Yeah, cool. You go ahead. Sure.
So firstly, accessibility is super important to us. I think it's really important for us to ensure that everyone can see and feel and learn and keep up with the journey. In quantum in particular, there's already some open source things out there. So with Microsoft Azure Quantum, with Google's kind of quantum libraries, and with IBM as well, there's a few open source things where you can learn about these techniques, which is, it's still a bit of a journey to learn about it, but I think you can start to learn about that. But in addition to that, I think what's really important is to develop these libraries which plug in with existing kind of software development frameworks. And I think that's something that we're quite focused on as well. So where you can easily call these libraries, easily call these functions, leverage the infrastructure, leverage the new way of solving these problems, while not having to re-architect your entire framework. So I think that's what I see as the pathway to learning in this space.
Yeah. And then just to field the question on, hey, is there risk in adopting these, particularly from a copyright perspective? I think also your question's related to, all right, all of the information that's fed into the models and how that's now being used and what those policies look like. First off, of like, is there risk? Short answer is yes, there is risk. And there is also not reward without risk, right? So I do in fact think, yeah, hey, there may be challenges. A lot of that work may be futile at times. But back to my point earlier, you don't see the reward without actually giving it a go and experimenting and embracing and like being early on that front edge. Now, I would be respectful in saying, yeah, hey, everyone has to manage their own capacity and their own level of risk. From a personal perspective, just given you only have so much time and resourcing to kind of deploy here, but I would always recommend carving out, yeah, hey, some time to embrace some of these, experiment, and yes, use those pieces. I do think the technology is moving faster than the policy and then the regulation, as we all know, and as it often does. And that will get ironed out, but it's certainly not yet, and certainly won't be for a while. And the last piece, while I didn't mention it earlier, but one thing I would maybe leave the group with is a famous quote that I think is very applicable here in this context, and that is the fact we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate in the long term. And I think that's also exactly what we're seeing at the moment as well. And there will be a long path to realization of this actually becoming integrated into all of our lives over time.
We want to thank our panels. We have a small gift as IPA. Should I give it? Okay, what we've done is essentially we've made donations to an NGO in Turkey that helps, for those most know, there was an earthquake in Turkey earlier this year. So we've made donations specifically to an NGO that helps children access technology within those regions on behalf of the attendees. I personally like to, again, thank your
Very
attendance.
humbling.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is presented to you.
Wow. Very humbling.
Should we give all and take a group?
Yes. Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's okay.
Watch something.
Yeah, together.
Thank you.
So, we have a quick, we have a quick break for 10, 12 minutes to get some coffee, etc., and then we'll have our second panel.
Great, thank you. That's cool.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have so many questions that I'm saving for the reception.
Hey, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much
This is very
for coming.
kind.
Thank you so much.